everyone, Emily here from Emily Reads, and today I have for you 46 books that have influenced me or impacted me in my life. Why, you ask? 46 books. What is the reason behind this video? So the reason behind this video is Tuesday, September 5th, was my birthday, and I turned 46 years old. And so I decided, what better way to celebrate my love of reading in my life than to look back and go through what books influenced me in my life. Some of these were, not gonna lie, were a slight little stretch, but some of them were very easy to think of. So, and some of them, I can't tell you like what number it is because I kind of went back and forth. So what I tried to do is write the list in order from like when I was youngest to most recently. And so I did have to go back sometimes as I thought about some other things. So my numbering is off. So there's that. Two, and looking through this list, I was like, holy cow, there is a gap. There is a gap when there was a time in my life when I was reading a lot of legal, like John Grisham, Robin Cook, and romance novels. And they were delightful and wonderful. But I have to be honest, they did not leave a lasting impact on my life. So there is that. And it was a big chunk of time. It also didn't help that like I've been in school a lot. So I do have my master's. I did go back and get endorsement in special education. And at one point in time I was in seminary. So during those phases of my life, I didn't do a whole lot of reading outside of school. So that being said, let's get started. So you're going to see me looking down a lot as I look through my journal. Just so you're aware, this is a chic Sparrow Traveler's like notebook cover. I can't remember what like line this is from. I want to say it's Darcy, but it could be wrong. Or it could be something from Outlander. I don't know. But I have two plain notebooks in here. So let's get started. Number one, The Pokey Little Puppy. It's a little golden book. I love that Pokey Little Puppy. He's just absolutely adorable. I should also add, I'm going to go through these kind of fast. I will give a description, but if I talk too long, we're going to be here forever. So there's that. So number one was Pokey Little Puppy. Number two, The Ox Cart Man. The illustrations are beautiful. It just follows the life of a farmer. And this is set like in the 1800s. And it just details his life from planting the crops through harvest and then taking what they've made to market and just the seasons of life on a farm. Number three, The Velveteen Rabbit. Now, I have to say, I don't remember too much about the Velveteen Rabbit. So I probably should reread it. But from what I know about my childhood, is that was the book that my mom would read to me when I was sick. And then similar to Velveteen Rabbit as a tie is Pat the Bunny. I love Pat the Bunny. It's like you can feel you pet the bunny, you scratch the man's beard, there's a mirror that it shines. We wore out copies of that book when I was younger, and anytime I go to a baby shower, that's a book that I give. And then 4, Green Eggs and Ham. I love Green Eggs and Ham. Again, I'm the youngest of 4, and my family, we wore out several copies of that book. Then I love number 5. I loved Little House on the Prairie. Specifically, I want to say These Happy Golden Years, and that's the one where Almanzo starts courting Laura, and she is a school teacher. And I just found, first of all, I love the little romance there. But 2, it's just fascinating what it was like for her as a teacher. Number 6, Anne of Green Gables. I love Anne of Green Gables. I got that book I think when I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade. I've read it several times. I love the movie adaptations with Megan Follows, although the 3rd one is Does not follow the books at all, but I love the Anne of Green Gables series. And book 4, Anne of Windy Poplars, is actually one of my favorite books in that whole entire series. The first and the fourth, I think, are the best. Number 7 is Daddy Longlegs by Jean Webster. And this follows the story of Judy Webster, who is they call them foundlings at the time. She's an orphan, and she lives in a home, an orphanage, and she gets sponsored by a benefactor to go to college. And the stipulation is she's never going to know the benefactor's name, but she needs to write to him. And so she calls him Daddy Longlegs in her letters, and she draws cute little pictures. There is an audiobook, which is delightful. But if you have not read the book and you want to read it for the first time, I don't recommend audio because there are pictures that she illustrates her letters with. And so you don't get that when you listen to the audiobook. There's also, just to be warned, there is a musical with Fred Astaire. It is terrible. So don't watch that movie with Fred Astaire. It is terrible. Number 8, Little Women. My mother gave me this beautiful illustrated version of Little Women. I've read it several times growing up. Love the book, love the movie. So when we first got our VCR, one of the first movies that my mom checked out from the library was Little Women with Katharine Hepburn. And so I've seen that movie countless times, and also the version with Elizabeth Taylor. And those were 2 of our favorite movies. And then, of course, when the movie version with Winona Ryder came out, we went and saw that in the theaters together. So every year now at Christmas time, I now have 5 versions of Little Women that I watch. I watched the one with Katharine Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor, Winona Ryder, the latest one directed by Greta Gerwig, and then there's a PBS version of Little Women. And I do it for multiple reasons. One, I just adore Little Women. I love the book. And also, it was one of my mother's favorite movies. I have good memories centered around that. And my mom passed away, sadly, Christmas Day 2009. And Christmas was her favorite holiday. So I watch all those versions just to have the memories of my mother and also the delight that is the book. Number 9, Witch of Blackbird Pond. I love the story of the Puritanism and the story of Kit, who I believe Kit is the main character. It's been a while. But how she moves with her to her aunt and uncle's Puritan home during the colonial times, as her father passed away. She's from Bermuda, and she does not fit in with the Puritan life. And at one point, she's accused of being a witch. And there's another woman in town who's accused of being a witch. And I loved learning about Salem witchcraft trials in school, and I loved that book. Excuse me. Number 10, Love Comes Softly by Jeanette Oke. It's just a super sweet Christian romance about a woman whose husband dies, and she and her husband were going out west. Her husband dies unexpectedly, and she's pregnant, and she has no family back on the east to go to. And this man, who is a widower, he offers a marriage of convenience. He's got a little girl that needs a mother, and so he says, I know you need a home, so if we marry, you can help raise my daughter, and I will give you a home, and if in the springtime things don't work out, you can go back east. And so it's a beautiful, it is a sweet Christian romance. Then I also loved Danger in the Shadows, which is by Dee Henderson. It is the prequel, actually, to the O'Malley series, and I chose the prequel because I loved the whole series, and it's thrillers with a found family, and Christian thrillers with a found family, and I also really enjoyed them because these are books that my mother and we read together. Number 12, The Chosen by Chaim Potok. I read this in school. It's about Reuven and Danny is an Orthodox Jewish boy, and Danny is Hasidic Jewish in New York shortly after or during World War II and shortly after. And they form a very unlikely friendship, and it just deals with their friendship and then the tensions that the world, how do they balance things within the world and also within their faith. Number 13, The Diary of Anne Frank, or The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. I read that numerous times. At one point in time, I wrote a diary because of that. I love that book. So I read the original diary as it was published, and then when I was in high school or college, was called the definitive edition was published, which was previously unpublished material that Otto Frank chose to not have published. They were just too personal and he didn't want them published. But I love that book, and I was able to go see the Secret Annex. I was in band in high school, and we went to Europe for spring break on a band tour, and one of our stops we had the opportunity to either go to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam or go to Anne Frank's house, and I chose Anne Frank's house. Number 14, The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, and this is a generational story. It follows about relationships between mothers and daughters, and I cannot remember how many mothers and daughter pairings it follows, but so we have the mother's stories, which I believe were centered around or took place around World War II or the Cultural Revolution. I honestly don't know and don't remember. I haven't read this since high school, so I apologize. And then the daughters' stories, and it's heartbreaking. It's interesting to see how much the daughters' stories were similar to the mother's stories. There is a movie that was made. I really enjoyed the movie. However, be prepared. It is very different from the book. I felt like the movie made things, it Hollywoodized the endings of stories, so it made things a lot happier than they really were, and gave more happy endings. Number 15, Pride and Prejudice. I love Pride and Prejudice. I love the book. And I think part of the love for Pride and Prejudice also centers around the love of the BBC version with Colin Firth and Jennifer Eel. And also it centers around memories again with my mother. We loved watching that together. Number 16, Persuasion, again by Jane Austen. And I love the story of Anne Elliot. I love the second chance at romance. And I love the fact that these protagonists are slightly older. So that's why I like that. Number 17, shocking. I really loved Moby Dick when I read it in school. I read the entire book. My professor said, you don't have to read the books about whaling, or the chapters about whaling. What I mean by that is there are chapters that describe like the different types of whales, the weapons that are used for whaling, like the boats that are used for whaling, that don't develop the plot. And so he was like, you don't have to read these chapters. I chose to read the whole entire book, but I love the story of good and evil. Is the whale good? Is Ahab good? Or is the whale bad? Is Ahab bad? I really loved all of the symbolism in that book. I thought it was wonderful. Number 18, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I adore this story. I think it is absolutely fantastic. I wrote a 15-page paper to get an honors credit for my women's lit class, and I just love the story of, and it's actually semi-autobiographical, where Charlotte Perkins Gilman said that had she followed the rest cure like her doctor prescribed for her, she would have had a similar fate to the protagonist of her story. So the story is about a woman who, she and her husband have just bought a new house, and she has recently given birth. And during this time, women who suffered from postpartum depression or mental health issues, they were prescribed what's called the rest cure, and they were just supposed to lie there and do nothing. That was what they were supposed to do. I don't see how that would help. In fact, I can see how that would actually cause you to go further into depression. I know for me, when I'm struggling with depression, I have to force myself to do things to get, and that's something that helps me to get out of it. But yeah, I love the Yellow Wallpaper. It is really spooky and eerie. It's a good Halloween season is coming up. I recommend reading that story. Number 19 and 20, I'm going to pair together, and that's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and Taming of the Shrew. And the reason why I'm pairing those two together is I was an English education major, and my senior year, I wrote my senior thesis on Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and Taming of the Shrew. So the original topic for my senior thesis was women's sexuality as defined by men in 4 plays. Punny title, right? But so I was going to look at how women's sexuality was defined in 4 different plays. One from the Restoration period, one from the Reformation period, obviously Shakespeare, and then a more modern play, which was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Well, there weren't too much research around the Restoration and the Reformation plays, and there's tons of research around Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and Taming of the Shrew. So I cut back the scope because I needed to. So really what I looked at with my senior thesis was what is a shrew as defined by these plays? What is involved in taming a shrew? And who really is the shrew in these plays? And it was a fascinating study. And oddly enough, too, is that Elizabeth Taylor, she was in both Taming of the Shrew and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which I thought was interesting. Then I also loved Alanna, which is the first book, Alanna, the First Year, I want to say, is the title of the book. The Song of the Lioness Quartet by Tamora Pierce, which really was my entry into fantasy. And in fact, I probably would have said, until recently, I probably would have said, I don't like fantasy. I really was liking fantasy. I just was fighting against that love. But I loved Song of the Lioness. I've read that quartet countless times throughout the years of my life. Number 29, On Fortune's Wheel by Cynthia Voigt, which I've just reread recently. Loved that book growing up, read it numerous times, just found it a heartbreaking story. Number 30, Davita's Harp, again by Chaim Potok. So Chaim Potok was one of my favorite authors, and actually I'm looking at this, I'm going, I should do a reread of some of his books. Who knows when I'll do that, but I do remember reading Davita's Harp countless times. Again, it's the story of a girl in this case being raised in an Orthodox Jewish home and just kind of trying to find her place in the world. Then also I loved The Time Traveler's Wife. And I read this in 2009. Because the movie was coming out, and I read this at the same time as my mother was dying of cancer. And I really loved the sense of longing in this book, and just the fact that someone could, I was reading of someone's experience that I could relate to, of like wanting to come back to certain events and places in our lives that were meaningful for us as informative, and going back to the memories that I had, growing up with my mom. So that was why it was meaningful. Number 23, Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. I will say this, I've only read Pillars of the Earth. I have not read any of the other books in that series. The book is a chonker, and it's a beautiful story of a town working to build a cathedral, and it's just stunning in its scope. Wonderful storytelling, and it got me through many ER trips with my mother. Number 22, When I Don't Desire God by John Piper. So he's very famous for his book Desiring God. And this book is, well, what do I do if I don't desire God? Like, I want to follow him, but I don't desire him. And what do I do with that? And so it's about how sometimes you have to fight for joy and putting yourself in that position. Number 24, Hunger Games. Love Hunger Games. It's great storytelling. I love the parallels to gladiators and Roman gladiators. I've taught it numerous times. Number 26, Ember and the Ashes. I, again, love that series. I think it's delightful. Number 27, Back to Tonic. To full disclosure, the author, Gene Kapura, I know I was friends with his daughter, who has passed away, sadly. And I know him as an author and as a person. And Back to Tonic is basically his journal. He wrote journals. He had a son his son died, Jake, who died when he was 13. He was on a missions trip with his church to Mexico, and the entire youth group died in a horrific car accident. And so Back to Tonic is his journals from that time period. And what I loved about that was it's an exploration of grief, and where do we turn from there, and what do we do with that grief, and also our relationship with God. And I loved it because someone got it. Like, someone got what I was feeling. Number 28, Ender's Game. I love by Orson Scott Card. I read that book actually for a philosophy of education course when I was working on my master's. And we had a list of books to choose from. And the assignment was read the book and then talk about the education system and their philosophy of education within the book. And I thought it was really fascinating that a science fiction book was on the list. So I said, let's choose that book. And I will say this. So how I wrote the book, there's going to be spoilers here. So how I wrote my paper was, well, if you're looking at the end result and the end game and the goal of the education system, it was a quite successful education system. They had this goal and this objective in mind, and they were successful with that goal and that objective. However, if we're looking at the effects of the education system on the students, it's an abusive and horrific, traumatizing education system. So that's why I think it's funny that I read that book for philosophy of education class, and it really was a fascinating study, not just with the education system, but of Ender and his relationship to his siblings. Number 20, I've lost count. I'm off. Next is Homegoing by I'm not going to know her. I can't pronounce her name. So Homegoing. And this is the story of, it starts off with two sisters or half sisters, I can't remember. And one is kidnapped and taken into slavery. The other, she marries a white man who is in charge of and runs the slave business. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase that. I apologize. So he is a white slave master. Well, he's not really a slave master. He's in charge of, like, he kidnaps the slaves and then like, and trade and sells them into slavery, which is horrible. Um, what I loved about this book is how slavery has impacted them, but also their family throughout the generations. And they have two very different lives, because one is obviously sold into slavery, obviously has the impacts of that. The other one seemingly has a life of privilege because she's married to a wealthy white man, but very much still traumatically impacted by slavery. And they're both sides of the family are devastatingly impacted by slavery. It was haunting, and when I finished reading it, I feel like it should be required reading. And it's a book that, if anytime someone asks what should I read, I'm looking for something to read, I always recommend Homegoing. I need to go back to my high school years because I'm reminded I forgot to mention Wild Magic by Tamora Pierce. And I love the story of Dane. I love Numair. And I also love the tie-ins and that we get to see, some of the characters from Alana in the stories. And I just love the Tales of Tortall. And again, I love Tamora Pierce. Then I also loved The Sculptress by Minette Walters. I honestly feel like that's one of the best thrillers I've ever read. It's very much Lizzie Borden-like, and it's the story of a woman who has been convicted and is now in jail for murdering her family, Lizzie Borden style. And it's the story of a reporter who is investigating, did she really commit this crime? And I love the book. There is a PBS movie of it, and I cannot watch that movie. It is creepy. Yeah, really love it. Then I loved The Commandant's Girl by Pam Jenoff. And this is a story of a Jewish woman in World War II. And she's married. Her husband is in the resistance, and I can't remember why, but they're kind of separated. He's doing his resistance work, and she actually is kind of a spy, and she ends up in a relationship with a commandant and develops feelings for him. So is very conflicted, and it's a heartbreaking book. I also loved A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. I've read that numerous times. The last time I read it I was in the hospital recovering from complications from a gallbladder surgery. I ended up had my gallbladder removed, developed a blood clot, and then I developed a severe infection in my vein from the top of my leg all the way down to my ankle, and so I had to be hospitalized. And so I read Discovery of Witches. It was a nice comfort read for me in the hospital. And I love the tale of Diana. I love the setting of the Bodleian and Oxford, and her research into the Book of Life and how that would impact the relationships between demons and vampires and witches. There can be no list of influential books without Robin Hobb. And so I have two, Fool's Errand and Fool's Assassin. And I could also probably add Assassin's Fate. But I rather instead added Fool's Assassin. It's the first book in the Fitz and Fool trilogy. And I can't really go into why for very spoilery reasons. But I can't go into why for very spoilery reasons. But for Fool's Errand, it just was like coming home. It's the first book in the Tawny Man trilogy. It's the first book after we've been away from Fitz, and we've been in the live ship traders world, and coming back to Fitz was like, it was just like I remember reading it and going, oh, I'm home. And it's just delightful. Then number 36, or I don't know where we're at with numbering, is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. Again, this is also a book that I feel like should be required reading. And it's the story of a woman who's modern day, which was modern for the time that it was written. It's 1976 or so. And she is transported back in time to a plantation pre-Civil War. And because she's Black, she is assumed to be a slave. And she, so she has to live the life of a slave during her time travel experience. And what is the impact on her life with regards to the slave owners? It's brutal in its depiction of slavery, and it's also brutal in her feelings towards the slave master, because it's a very, I'm trying to be careful with how I phrase things, because I don't, spoilers, but just their relationship, it's rough. Number 37, 38, I'm off my numbering, is What is a Girl Worth by Rachel Denhollander. This is a memoir, and Rachel Denhollander, she is one of the survivors of Larry Nassar. If you're not aware of who Larry Nassar is, he was the team doctor for USA Gymnastics, the women's USA Gymnastics, for a couple of decades, or for at least a decade, and he abused hundreds of girls. And she is responsible. She's one of the first to come out and say, she's not the first, she's like the second or third to call the Indiana Star and say, Larry Nassar abused me. And she really was instrumental in helping law enforcement and putting together the case against Larry Nassar. And this memoir is a wonderfully written book, and is a very important read. One, because it's just her life, but also two, just having the perspective from someone who has experienced, to be able to gain that perspective from someone who has experienced abuse. I think that's another one that I think that people should read. Obviously, triggers abound, but it's I think it's important, because to know that if that is something that you have experienced, you're not alone. Number 38, 39, And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I love this mystery. I've read it more than once, and I just think it's wonderful. Number 39, 40, I don't know. Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. The prose is just absolutely beautiful, and I really love the discussion of, traditional beliefs versus Christianity, and how do those things fit together? Do they fit together? I loved the discussion of a woman's place in society and what happens to women when they don't want to take the traditional path. So I just thought that was beautiful. I also loved Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. And that's his story of growing up of mixed race in South Africa during apartheid and then after apartheid. And during apartheid, he was considered a crime, because it was a crime for a white person and a Black person to marry and also to have children. So he was a crime. And just, I did not. I don't watch the Daily. Is he on the Daily Show? I don't know. He's on a TV show. I don't watch it. Um, but he is so funny. So this book deals with apartheid and racism, but he also does so with humor. His mother is a force to be reckoned with. And it like really, this book is almost a love letter to his mother, and it's just wonderful. I also loved As Long as the Lemon Tree Grows, which came out recently, and this is a book of um, a young adult book about the Syrian Revolution. It's of course full of traumatizing things, but it's also full of hope. And it was just beautifully written. And again, I feel like this should be required reading. I also loved Warrior Girl Unearthed. I had a hard time figuring out Firekeeper's Daughter or Warrior Girl Unearthed, which one should be on the list. But I love both for two very different reasons, but I loved Warrior Girl Unearthed, I think a little bit more, only because at one point in time, I wanted to be an archaeologist. So in high school, my sophomore year, I was gung-ho of I'm going to be an archaeologist. I either wanted to work with, do Egyptology or Native American studies. And I was going to study at the Oriental Institute at University of Chicago. I don't know if it's been renamed. I'm sorry if it has been renamed and I don't know the new name. But when I was in high school, that's what it was called at the University of Chicago. So that's what I was going to do. And obviously I'm not that. I'm a special education teacher. But this Warrior Girl Unearthed really discusses the problems associated around what we see at museums and how those artifacts are acquired, and how basically not basically, it is grave robbery, and just how Native Americans are trying desperately to get their ancestors back to their homes and to have those proper burials, and how hard it is for them to get that back. So I do think it is a really good and important read. And I want to do some more reading on that subject. I also loved Alice I Have Been. This one was one that was a little bit more of a stretch for me, I will say this, in adding this to the list. And it's haunting. So I love Alice in Wonderland, and this book is about the real Alice. So Charles Liddell, I believe is his name. So Lewis Carroll's real name was Charles Liddell, and he was close to a family and had a girl named Alice, and he wrote Alice's Adventures in Wonderland for her. And it's about their relationship, this book. And it is haunting. Like, when I finished, I was like, oh, it's a devastating book. It's devastating. I also really loved reading Lolita in Tehran. And this, I don't really read a whole lot of nonfiction. But this was one that I read. And it's just a beautiful story of this woman who had read classical books with a group of women in Tehran, and just their experiences and how that, and then the cultural influences that they had and how it impacted the reading, and just a story of womanhood and what that means to be a woman in Tehran. I also loved, I should add, Disappointment with God. It didn't make it on this list, and I need to add that. So really it's going to be 47 books now. So Disappointment with God by Philip Yancey, and I read this in 2002. So I can't really say too much about it. But I read this in 2002, and it's a study of the book of Job, and basically how can a good God who says he's good and wants good things for his people, how does a good God allow suffering? And I needed those questions answered. And I read that book, and it really helped me understand God's sovereignty. And now I have two books that are on here, but that I have not read. But they have made an impact for me because they are from my father, he's passed away. So the last two books are The Complete Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and Ulysses. Someday I will read them. And someday then I will be able to say that they have had a bigger impact. But the reason why they're on this list is I have watched the Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch, and I have read Study in Scarlet. I have not made it to the solution because I said I can't read the solution until I have some vague clue of who might it be, and I had no clue, but I'm going to read it again soon. At any rate, so both these books, at one point I told my dad, you know what, I want to read Sherlock Holmes. At one point I said, you know, I want to read Ulysses. And Ulysses was my father's favorite book. He read it in the army, and he read it numerous times. The first time he read it when he was in the army. And my dad, who loves books, he went to his bookshelves and he gave me the complete one of his editions of The Complete Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and then one of his editions of Ulysses. And my father was not a person to give someone his books. Like he did not, like you did not touch his books. And so for him to give me those two books, it was just very meaningful. I may never read them, but I will never get rid of them. So, whew. So that is 46, 47 books that have impacted me. Let me know your thoughts down below. What books have impacted you? And have a wonderful Sunday. Bye.